All right, welcome everybody. Planning board meeting this Wednesday, July 19th. First item is a roll call. Tonight we have Lisa Buck, we've got Krista Schwinter, we've got Judd McIntosh, we've got myself, Phil Ruck, we've got Jeremy Chubbuck, we've got Dave Thompson, and we have Mike Costello down in the end. Next item is acceptance of the agenda. Can I have a motion?
I make a motion, we accept the agenda.
All right. Your motion and second. Any changes? Hearing none. All those in favor is the agenda is presented. Next up, approval of the minutes of June 21st, 2017. Caitlin did a bang-up job on these things again, very detailed. But any, I guess first we'll take a motion.
I move we accept the minutes.
Very good. Have a second?
Second.
Very good. Edits.
Okay. Just a couple of small things. One is that on the first page, under item 3, last line under there, the A fell off the end of my first name. So it's just a bit embarrassing.
It's not one spell check will pick up.
And on page 8, the very first line, the property currently is owned by Independence Advocates, oh, I guess that should be an S there at the end, Advocates of Maine, as opposed to OD.
Good catch. Any others?
That's it.
Other comments? Very good. We have those two changes as amended. All those in favor? Very good. Unanimous. Next.
I'd just like to add, I think they're great minutes.
Yes.
Thanks.
Mike, you're up. You are, yeah.
I wasn't here for the last meeting, so I didn't.
Oh, that's right. You can't vote on that. Do we have a quorum? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So, all right. So you can't vote, but you are designated member for the rest of the evening. Right then. So next up, we have 2 public hearings to deal with tonight. The first one is a site plan application of Clyde A. Philbrick for earth moving activity at 270 Stillwater Ave, which is located in the Forestry and Agriculture District, involving more than 100 cubic yards of material. Can I have the applicant step up to the mic and tell us what you propose, who you are, and what you propose?
By Philbrick.
Yep.
You hear me?
Yep.
And it's for farmer's market is what I want to put there.
Okay.
And it's almost finished.
Yep.
When I start, they only got to put a little bit more.
Okay. Yeah, we have the application material. I guess, Evan, as a thorough package you presented, could you give us a bit of a summary of past issues and what we're dealing with tonight?
Sure. Mr. Philbrick, several years ago, decided that he wanted to start an open-air farmers market opportunity on his property. The property is right at the Bangor city line. It's a large parcel of about 46 acres. He's designated a small part of that right just off Stillwater Ave, where the driveway comes into Stillwater Ave for this purpose. And in 2013, he applied for and received a Tier 1 permit from the DEP under the Natural Resources Protection Act, because the filling activity involves wetland. And this wetland is part of it. It's really the wooded fringe of the Caribou Bog. And he got, there had already been some fill brought in by others prior to Mr. Philbrick's ownership of the property. And Mr. Philbrick was proposing to cover that fill with concrete fill and other stuff with additional fill. He received approval in September 2013 to cover and level just over 3,000 square feet area of wetland at that time. And since then, I think has been working at doing that filling activity. Bill received some information about the fill activity going on, realized that it might involve more than 100 cubic yards, which requires under our ordinance a review by the planning board, site plan review for the fill activity. The farmer's market is an allowed use as a matter of right with just a permit from the code enforcement officer. So the farmer's market and all the stuff that happens with the farmer's market is not under the jurisdiction of the planning board's review, but the fill activity is. So, this is fill of about 9,100 square feet. That's about a fifth of an acre. A lot of it is already in place. There's still a pile there to be spread and some area to be spread. Mr. Philbrick has had some of the erosion control measures in place, silt fences along two sides of the fill, and I think simply plans to continue to level it, grade it, and make it available to farmers who want to come in with their pickup trucks and sell off the back of their trucks, basically. There's an area, it's a large enough area for customers to pull into the driveway and off the driveway and park there as well. Stan Pliska has prepared the plan showing the area of fill with a little bit of a timeline when he believes, based on aerial imagery, that the fill has occurred, and some of what still needs to happen. This is virtually all wetland area. I think it's important that the DEP found no significant impact on significant wildlife habitat or significant natural resources back in 2013. I contacted DEP last week after we got the application just to understand that they were satisfied that the terms of their approval had been satisfied and that no more approvals were needed. It seems to be a somewhat larger area. I mean, overall it's a small area, but it seems to be somewhat larger than the area that had been discussed in the 2013 approval. They were aware that this was there, just hadn't had a chance to go out and look at it, and they haven't yet gotten back to me, at least. I don't know if they got back to Mr. Philbrick or Stan. So that's it. Included in the plan is some basic erosion control measures, including the silt fence, grading the steep slope that's at the edge of the fill to 3-to-1 slope. I've recommended a couple of additional things as part of that to make sure that the grading comes into the interior of the site, so it doesn't end up filling more of the wetland than what is shown as the boundaries, and that the seeding be in accordance and stabilization be in accordance with the best management practices of the DEP, and that this essentially is a small parking lot, is what this is, and it should be gravelled. You know, our ordinance calls for a 6-inch gravel base. It doesn't have to be paved, but it would have to have a gravel base. So that's it. You'll see if you choose to approve this project, I've suggested a few conditions, including just making sure that the DEP continues to be satisfied with the project. Okay,
Thank you. Before I open it up to the public hearing, do we have questions to the applicant from the board? Pretty straightforward. It's still a Tier 1 permit, right? I mean, it's still within the smaller range, so as long as that's addressed. Yeah, I guess timeline, I mean, you've almost got it all done. You'll hear from DEP. You have not heard from them yet?
Yeah, I have.
You have?
Yeah, they came out and measured.
Okay. Yeah, what did they have to tell you?
Well, I was putting in a second driveway, and I decided not to do that. They said it was okay the way it is, my driveway. That was going to be the entrance and an outlet, but I'm just having one driveway, so I don't have to change it.
That was recently, after?
Yep.
Okay, so are they going to give you documentation so that if we move forward with this tonight, that the town will get a copy of all that?
Well, I'll ask him to, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Other questions? All right, I'm going to open up the public hearing, invite anybody to step up to the mic and tell us your thoughts. Yeah, yeah. Don't be shy. All right, I'm going to leave the public hearing open. Pretty straightforward, again, just because of the earth moving activity. That's why they're here before us this evening, and a lot of work is done, but Evan is, if you notice in the review, he's called out the things that I would think of, the banks, the erosion control, the silt fence, you know, you are on a wetland, so the DEP has, yep. Yep. Sorry, we gotta have everything on the record. Could you step up to that mic and just speak on for the record, please?
I have one of the sides towards the road, it's got the fence up already.
Yep.
And then the back side towards Orono is done.
Yep.
And the one along the driveway, it just comes from that to the driveway.
Good. I mean, that's part of the DEP process anyways, is that you have
Already
erosion
had it
control, so, good. I don't have
There's
anything.
one long side that's not fenced yet, that would need
Yep.
to be fenced and graded to that 3-to-1.
Okay. All right, last call, public hearing. All right, gonna close the public hearing. Final comments? Got anything?
I'm just curious.
Yep.
Probably no winter operation, right? No. So you won't even be plowing it? It'll remain?
My son plowing my driveway, pushing snow over there.
Okay. I was just wondering where the snow would go if it'd be pushed into the wetlands. Oh, out on the edge. Yeah.
All right.
That was my guess, yeah.
Very good. I think we're probably ready for a motion then. Proposed findings of fact, which probably, we'll start. Again, these are just proposed, up for discussion to the board.
Everybody making their way down.
Okay.
Very good. So these are proposed findings of fact for the fill and grading project at 270 Stillwater Ave by Clyde Philbrook for the site plan review dated July 19th, 2017. Pursuant to Article 6, Section 18-177 of the Orono Code of Ordinances, the Orono Planning Board has considered the application of Clyde Philbrook for approval of this site plan to fill and grade approximately 9,100 square feet of land at 270 Stillwater Ave on property identified as tax map 29-1, Lot 1, for the purpose of a farmer's market. The property is located in the Forestry and Agriculture District. Based on all evidence presented by the applicant, reviewing agencies, town departments, and the public, it has found the following. Number one, again, these are site plan review criteria. Again, we say whether we have issues with, so we're giving this a thumbs up or thumbs down. Again, this is a little newer process. So number one, right title or interest, that the applicant is the owner of the property. Any issues with that? Very good, all in favor. 2, requirements of the district, that the use is an allowable use within the Forestry and Agriculture District and conforms to the requirements of the district. Any issues there? That's another yes. 3, compliance with town ordinances and codes, that the site with a proposed fill of an area of approximately 9,100 square feet in place has the capacity to accommodate a small-scale, open-air farmer's market and to meet the standards of the land use ordinance for a farmer's market as demonstrated by an illustrative layout plan prepared by Pliskin Day Land Surveyors dated June 26, 2017. Any issues there?
Just a quick question. The plan shows 9,900 square feet fill area versus 9,100 square feet. So I don't know if I'm misreading something.
Because I think it's slightly over. Isn't that one of the issues, is that?
It was over, I think the initial application was like 3,100 square feet. I thought I saw from the NERPA pack that was submitted. So that was the original 2013 approved square footage, I believe, and then they went out and found that it's 9,100. Did that say 9,900?
It says 9,900 on the,
It's 9,900. If you go over
Yes.
10,000, that kicks you, I mean, every threshold you pass, you know the drill. You have to be 120 by 120. Okay.
So I apologize. Did the original, or earlier plan have 9,100, or did I just misread it? Okay.
Whatever the math, yeah, 120.
900, you're right. This one says 9,900. Yes.
So
that
it
should
is
be correct. It says
9,900.
Yes.
All right, good catch, Jeremy. So we're going to change that to of approximately 9,900 square feet in place. So with that, any issues, any other issues? We're good. Number 4, utilization of the site, natural features, water quality protection, and shoreland relationship. A, that the fill project will alter the natural landscape for an allowed use, but that the fill area is appropriately located at the fringe of a forested wetland adjacent to the property's driveway and near Stillwater Avenue for easy access and to minimize further impacts on the larger wetland of which this area is a part. I'm going to do all 3 of these. And that the fill area is located of shoreland zones as defined by the state mandatory Shoreland Zoning Act and is mapped on the town zoning map and away from a shoreland resource protection district that protects a large area of the Caribou Bog and further is adjacent to but outside of the 100-year floodplain associated with the bog. And then in C, in 2013, a permit issued by the Maine Department of Environmental Protection for this project determined that the activity will not negatively affect the freshwater wetland of special significance or other protected natural resources. Planning board conditions this finding on written verification prior to any additional filling and grading of the land from the Maine DEP that the project is in compliance with a 2013 permit or an amendment thereto has been approved, and D, that the proposed site development and use will not adversely impact either the quality of the quality or the quantity of groundwater available to abutting properties or to any public water supply system. Any issues with A, B, C, or D? Hearing none. 5, stormwater management, that the project affects a small area totaling 9,900 square feet of land, involves no building construction, and the fill area will be topped with gravel or crushed stone, minimizing stormwater runoff, and that any new runoff will drain naturally to surrounding wetland areas that are on the applicant's property or to the adjacent drainage ditch along Stillwater Avenue without undue adverse impacts. Any issues there? Hearing none. 6, erosion control, that the applicant has provided for erosion control measures to capture sediment during the filling activity and to stabilize soils and slopes following completion of the fill project. Any issues there? Hearing none. Number 7, other site plan approval standards, that the proposed use of the site for an open-air farmer's market is an allowed use with permit from the Code Enforcement Office within the Forest and Agriculture District without further planning board review beyond matters relating to the earth moving and filling of the indicated area of land, and therefore the planning board makes no findings concerning traffic and pedestrian access, storage of materials, water supply and sewage disposal, utilities, hazardous, special and radioactive waste, solid waste management, historic and archaeological resources, noise and lighting. We understood there? No issues? Good. Lastly, financial capacity, that the activity on the site to date under the 2013 permit from Maine Department of Environmental Protection, combined with a small scale of the project, is sufficient to demonstrate that the applicant's financial capacity to complete the project in accordance with town ordinances and the plan. Any issues with that one? All right, hearing none, I am now ready for a motion.
I move that we approve the site plan review by Clyde Philbrick for the property located at 270 Stillwater Avenue, tax map 29-1, lot 46, with the following 5 conditions. 1, that before a building permit is issued by the code enforcement officer, the town received written verification that either the Maine DEP is satisfied with the 2013 permit, that the 2013 permit is sufficient for the work done and planned, or that an amended permit has been approved. Number 2, that the limits of fill are shown on the fill and grading plan, meaning that the final grading to achieve the 3-to-1 slope will not involve additional wetland alteration. Number 3, that the erosion control will use best management practices for seeding and stabilization of the slopes as specified by the Maine DEP's manual Maine Erosion and Sediment Control Best Management Practices. Number 4, that the fill area be surfaced with at least 6 inches of gravel or crushed stone. And finally, number 5, that the project must comply with all other applicable local and state standards relating to the proposed activity.
Thanks, Judd. Got a motion, kind of a second?
Second it.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Unanimous? All right, next up, we have another public hearing. This is an amendment to Section 18-31 of the Land Use Ordinance and the addition of Section 18-150 to the Land Use Ordinance to, 1, define student homes, and 2, provide certain standards for student homes. This is one we pushed off from last time. Evan, you're up.
Thank you. This amendment, as a number of you know, derives from the comprehensive plan. One of the focuses of the comprehensive plan was how you appropriately and effectively integrate student housing into established neighborhoods, a trend which is, of course, is very long-standing, the town of Orono. The comprehensive plan committee at that time, based on research on how other municipalities in the United States that host universities and colleges also try to find that right balance. And one of the tools used is an approach that actually defines student rental dwellings that house students, usually some number of students. They define that as a specific land use, and they call that a student home. It's an actual land use. So instead of it merely being an apartment house, a multifamily dwelling that happens to have students in it, it is actually a land use unto itself, called student home. And so it becomes a land use just like a hair salon or a retail store or a doctor's office would be a land use. And as a land use, it can be regulated in ways that the town may wish to regulate that land use. Put it in all the districts, or can allow it in some districts but not other districts. It can establish performance standards for it. So that's what what the comprehensive plan recommended, was to establish this land use called student home, define it, and then set standards for it. The comprehensive plan recommended going to the extent of standards that would limit the numbers of student homes in particular neighborhoods. And the plan, as adopted by the council, asked for a draft of an ordinance for its consideration related to student homes. So we are now implementing that recommendation, at least to partway. We're laying the foundation for it. What this proposed amendment does is it goes partway towards the full extent of what the comprehensive plan recommended, in that it defines student for the sole purpose of this ordinance. You know, it doesn't try to define student in its whole social context, it limits the definition of student to an individual who is attending or is accepted admission as an undergraduate student at an institution of higher learning. An individual who is a graduate student is not a student for the purposes of it. The only reason we're defining student is to then be able to go on and define student home. A student home then means a single-family detached, single-family attached, two-family or multifamily dwelling in which one or more of the dwelling units is occupied by 3 or more students, as defined in the ordinance, at least one of whom is paying rent, lease fee, or a similar fee for the right to occupy the dwelling unit. Whether or not, and we're talking about whether or not the students are legally related. This has nothing to do with related or unrelated, which is another piece of our ordinance. Then there are some exemptions to that definition of a student home. The idea is not to catch up into this regulation students who are living with their parents, or students who are living in a residential structure in which the owner of that property, who's not a student, also lives there, because the Comprehensive Plan Committee found that there are rarely, if ever, any difficulties with students boarding in a single-family home or renting a dwelling unit next to another dwelling unit in which the owner of the property also resides. So it exempts from student home single-family dwellings occupied by students, but also occupied as a primary year-round residence by the dwelling's owner of record, and such owner is not a student. And it also applies that to two-family or multifamily, where the owner is actually owning a unit and lives, resides in that unit within that building. It also exempts situations where students are living with their parents as their parents in the home that is the parents' primary year-round residence. And just to be clear, it exempts, because we're not talking about so-called community living facilities, which are group homes. We're not talking about dormitories, fraternities and sororities and all those things that are separately defined terms, nor are we talking about dwellings that would be owned and managed by the University of Maine, whether or not they're on campus. So that's the definition. So now we have a definition of student home as a land use. Question is then what you do with that land use, that defined land use. And at this point, the way I have drafted it and had my initial conversations with the council to get some guidance prior to their referral of this to you for recommendation, is that it establishes for any new student home from the point of adoption forward, it establishes a certificate of occupancy requirement in which the new student home would have to demonstrate to the code enforcement officer that essentially the health safety standards of the building code and fire code are satisfied within that student home. So the certificate of occupancy requirement, that's really as far as this proposed goes with regulation. The next step would be, if the town wished to at some point, which I believe would require a much more substantial public process, would actually limit the number of student homes in any given neighborhood, which is what a number of the communities that we researched do. And they limit those numbers through a density limit, distance limit. They basically say, in this zoning district or in this specified neighborhood or on these specified streets, there shall be no more than one student home per X hundred feet within X hundred feet of each other.
Right, and just as a reminder, those of you that did not participate in our comp plan process, that concept is one of the things we identified, and we had just a tremendous amount of discussion about that. So this is just one step in the process, and we'll see where we go after this. But
and there was, the Comprehensive Plan Committee conducted a web-based survey about this issue, and got some good feedback from some 250 respondents from residents of property owners in Orono. But it's a big step to actually limit the number. That's a big step that would probably require a lot of public involvement, probably neighborhood by neighborhood, to see if this is something that they would want, so they would understand how they are both benefited and potentially harmed by that. Because if they accept that kind of limit, then they're also limiting their own ability to sell their homes later on, because they've eliminated part of the potential market for their homes. And in any case, this laying the foundation would be a necessary step. My read right now of the town and of the council is that is a large step that would take probably good 8 to 12 months to process through. And so in talking with the council, the council agreed that we should push forward now, at least with this laying the foundation, defining what student home is. You're requiring the certificate of occupancy, which is a major health safety step, and then monitor the situation to decide if and when the town wants to go any further with any kind of regulation of this new land use called student home. So that's the proposal that's before you, and the council is looking forward to your input and recommendation.
Thanks, Evan. Before I open up the public hearing, questions, clarifications?
I have a few points of clarification.
Yeah.
So if I have a single-family home with 2 students living in it, it does not count as a student home?
Correct.
And it would not need to be in the rental registration program?
It has to be in the rental registration. Rental registration program is a separate ordinance. And anybody renting any units to even one student requires registration.
Right,
But it would not be a student home that would be subject to any regulations of a student home, unique to student home.
Because the language here kind of implied to me that these, I guess it's just reiterating that it's required. Okay. So if you had a single-family home that you typically had not rented to students, well, number one, so all legacy or non-conforming will just continue to be as they are.
Correct.
And they won't go through this process. It would be if someone came in and bought a new home or bought a home that was not previously a student home. If they wanted to rent it to students, they would have to go through this process.
If it was 3 or more students, yes.
And so what's going to tell them that they need to do this?
It's a really good question, and I think there needs to be, if the town passes this, there needs to be really intensive outreach to realtors and to the university and on websites and through social media. So, it'd be to all everybody who's on our rental registration database already, because some of them would be people who are in the business of renting to students and might be ones who would create something new. It's not going to be perfect to get that information out, but I think through a combination of traditional media, social media, and really letting realtors in particular know that this requirement is there, I think it'd be reasonably well covered.
So that leads me to my next question. What's the consequence if you discover 3 years down the line someone bought a home and they've been renting it to students the last 3 years?
I'm going to take a shot at that, but Bill can tell me that whether this is accurate or not, but based on past experience, usually the code enforcement officer would be in touch with the owner saying, you are required to have this, you've been doing this for this long, we would like to propose a consent agreement that says you will come into compliance within a certain period of time. There might be some financial, a fine of some sort that's agreed upon in the consent agreement, or there might not be. But basically, it would be to get them up to speed so that they actually get a certificate of occupancy after inspection.
Which would be a one-time inspection. This is pretty much just a one-time.
A one-time inspection at this point, yes. It's, in time, as you know, well, right now, as you know, the fire marshal of the town conducts on a 3-year cycle inspections of multi-family structures, that is, structures with 3 or more dwelling units. It does not do inspections of structures that are single-family or 2-family. The comprehensive plan recommends expanding that routine cyclical review to single-family, 2-family as well, and I know Dave Mylan and the fire department have at least talked about that from time to time.
So I guess my only concern with this would be that, because I think it is going to be quite easy for someone to buy a property. Like, my impression of real estate agents is typically they don't want to do anything that's going to stop the deal. Maybe I shouldn't say things like that. But it's in their best interest to have the deal happen, right? And so I'm not sure if they're the best person to say, hey, stop, think about this. You shouldn't do this. So because it seems to me that it is quite easy, to see somebody buying it in 2 or 3 years or 4 years down the road, kind of finding out they have this problem. It would seem to me it would make sense to define exactly what the consequence would be, because I would guess that we will run into this from time to time.
Yeah.
I don't think that stops me from saying yes to this, but that's the only point I see in this that could be an issue is,
I had a similar concern. I just want to make sure we had teeth in there that could be enforceable. We've always had that issue with some of these student-related.
Wouldn't that be the next step, though, after this? If I understand what Evan said, this is the foundation, and then how many are allowed in certain areas and all the regulatory.
Yeah, there is a regulatory aspect to this, and that regulatory aspect is you got to get a certificate of occupancy,
Right.
and you only get the certificate of occupancy if you have demonstrated after inspection that the building and fire safety codes have been met. So Judd's concern is a legitimate one. It's one that we've concerned about and have talked about internally, how you get the word out effectively. So Judd, one question for you is, there are, elsewhere in the ordinance, there's a whole enforcement section that says what happens if you're in violation, and that's what would take over, that's what would apply at that point. And I certainly think that the communication with all the realtors and university students and
you're doing
others.
everything you could there. I agree, you're doing everything you could there.
Yeah.
I'm not implying.
I think that
something else.
communication will emphasize that there will be enforcement consequences to it, just like if they don't disclose lead or they don't disclose other things that they're required to disclose under state law. But, one possibility is that you could write in, I'm not sure you're suggesting this, but you could write in a grace period.
Yeah, or something that.
And you said that if, and I don't know exactly how that would be worded, what it would say, but you could probably write in a grace period recognizing that communication will not be perfect on this. And so that, anything that happens between now and 3 years from now will be subject to consent agreement, but not necessarily financial consequence, as long as, once they become aware of it. The only thing you don't want to do is give people an excuse to have known about it, but say, well, I didn't know about it.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is Bill is very reasonable, but the next code enforcement officer might not be so reasonable. So, you just don't want.
You're buttering him up?
Yeah, I am, yeah. Listen, I want code enforcement, it's like HR, you always have it on your side. Anyways. Yeah, so I guess, I don't know what the solution is there, but I guess that's my only concern at all is just what because I do think that, like you said, in 3 or 4 years, it'll be more of a known quantity. Really, I don't know how many houses are being turned right now into student homes in Orono. I don't know if, it seems like it was much more of a problem in the past, as currently it's not, so maybe it just would be fine, because it's not a huge,
Yeah, I
in
think
3 or 4 years, maybe when it's a problem again, everyone will know about it, so it's less of an issue.
I think 2 or 3 things have slowed things down. My impression is, one is the recession. Second is the great expansion of the supply of rental housing in the town.
Yep.
And third is the tightening up on the standard for unrelated persons in the medium-density residential district has made it less economical to buy a single-family home at the desired price.
Agreed.
Be able to afford it.
Bill?
Yes, hi, Bill Murphy, code officer. There have been discussions internally about revising the rental registration ordinance and reestablishing the rental ordinance advisory committee between landlords and tenants, and other people are involved with that too. Previously, it said that members of the representatives, rather, from the university and the landlords and students also from different areas of town would have to be involved. That requirement has gone away, but there has been discussions to bring that back into play, to reestablish that board. And I think that board could make recommendations or involve themselves in the, if the situation arises for 2 years, the person has had a student home and we didn't know about it, they could put some input into the question.
What do you think, Ted?
I'm done.
Grace period? Does any of those things, I mean, because we're pushing this onto the council, so we could add something for them to consider. I don't think that's unreasonable.
Yeah, I mean, Bill's idea is, I like the idea of having some oversight or some peer review, because then they can make a determination, hey, do we think this person was gaming the system or not? But I don't know if that's a lot of overhead for this. So, to me, that might be a little bit more than is needed. So, I'm good. I mean, I just wanted to voice that, and if you want to pass it along, if they have a great idea. I don't have a great solution, I just have a problem, so. And I'm not, like I said, it's not going to stop me from saying, this is fine, and I agree to this.
Can you note that concern, though?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, it's a good point. Might as well, I'm going to open up the public hearing, and then we'll just continue the discussion. Other comments? Anybody from the audience want to weigh in as well? Here's your chance. All right, so further discussion from the board? And then just some of the, the definitions and all that, did you find that from another model? I'm just
Yes, it's
trying to figure out.
really, I borrowed information from other ordinances, made some judgments. The ordinances all vary as to whether graduate students are included or not.
Right.
Who's exempt, what's the situation is exempt or what's not, discussed with the council. The council asked to put in the threshold of 3. And so that's what's here.
Okay. Mike?
Am I a little bit concerned or confused? Now, there's a overlap of legacy homes. You're talking about homes that you already know people are having students in. They're exempt, right? From this?
Yes, if, we know where most, I mean, I can't say it's 100%, but after now 7 or 8 years of the rental registration ordinance in place, we pretty much know where all the dwelling units are that have students in them, because they're registered.
Partly answered my next part. So you know where they are. So as you move forward with the new definition of a student home, you said you're going to limit the number of student homes in a given area?
Well, in the future, this ordinance doesn't do it, but in the future, the town could choose to take that additional step. And if they took that additional step, and I think this is what you probably get into, if a neighborhood or street already exceeded that, then basically that place would be frozen in place in terms of numbers.
Until a home changed over to a family home, and then that opened up. Okay.
There was quite a bit of concern during our public hearings and during our 2.5 years of comp plan development about some of the neighborhoods that, were turning, and, people wanted to protect their traditional neighborhoods, and, my area of town in Webster has undergone a substantial change. So it's happened in a lot of areas, and there was a lot of discussion about that. So I see this as a good first step. I'm hoping that it continues to go farther. The models, because we had a subcommittee, Judd, you were on that subcommittee, and some of the other comp plan members, a lot of discussion about, what other towns have done and what's successful. So this is, I just see this as step one. It seemed fairly tight from my, my review, but, I'm hoping that we can continue down the path, even if it takes 8 to 12 months, so that's my opinion. Other questions, comments, changes? All right, so we've got the one concern that's been noted. So, as is, again, from recommendation from this board, as is, noting Judd's concern, is that?
I'm sorry, I just have one question before we move to that.
Yeah.
And that is, does this apply only to homes that are being purchased, that are turning over? Or does this apply to other places that would meet the definition but that are already in existence?
If there were let's just say a single-family home where somebody an owner or occupant lived in that home and they were deciding to move to Florida and decided that they wanted to continue to own the home but just now rent it out, they've never been rented out before, and they want to rent it out to a number of people that meets the definition of student and student home, then they would fall under the regulation. So they're not selling the home. I think that's what you're asking. They would be, yes, anything that is not a student home today, but would become a student home under any circumstance after the adoption of the ordinance would be a student home that would be regulated by this.
Okay. I guess my question is, there's a house down the street from me that has students in it.
Yes.
Okay, would that be eligible to be a student home since it already has students in it? Or would this
would
apply
not. It would
only
be
to places that become?
It would be grandfathered.
Okay, so we grandfather everything that's in existence
It would be a student
now?
home, but it'd be a grandfathered student home.
Okay,
And if it ever was converted back to an owner-occupied situation, and then wanted to reconvert back to student home, it would then be caught in the student home
okay,
regulation, but
all right, I've got it, thank you.
So I do have, that brings me one more other question. If I have a single-family home that I've typically rented to 2 professionals for years, and then one year I decide to rent it to 3 students,
come to student home.
Yeah.
And what if,
So you have to go through all this process now.
Yes.
Is there a way that we could distinguish that, hey, this is a rental? It's always been a rental?
You could do it. I mean, you would obviously dilute the ordinance, but,
I'm just not sure if it's necessarily fair to landlords to say all of a sudden now that you've got to
Now
go through
you're-
this process, even though you've owned this place for 20 years and rented it.
the point is that it is, a student home becomes a land use.
Hmm.
It would be no different than, in a sense, it's no different than, I'm renting it now to I'm renting it out to people who are living there, and now I'm gonna rent it out to a beauty salon. Well, you can't do that in every zoning district. Or you can't do certain things without, maybe you're renting it out to something that's allowed, but now that thing that's allowed requires sprinkler systems or
So-
something else.
If you go through it once, though, you're done. So like if one year I rent it to 3 students, and then next 4 years I rent it to professionals again, and then in year 5 or 6, I rent it to 3 students
No,
again.
it's,
You'd have to go through the process again? I mean, I would think you'd want to encourage the renting to grad students and to professionals. And in effect, this is almost discouraging that, if you couldn't go back and forth.
yeah, I have to think about whether, I think probably you're right, I think they'd probably be okay with going back, once they've been through it once, because they've met the standard at that point. And then it's a question of whether the town wants to just on a cyclical basis extend their health safety, fire safety reviews to all rentals and not just multifamily.
So can we add that concern as
Yes, I
well?
will make sure I get that clarified.
Just because on an ongoing basis, you just never know as a landlord who's going to rent your place. I mean, you're looking for the highest qualified candidate, and
Yep.
so anyways,
This is a balance between landlords and the neighborhoods that have been single families and,
Right.
just want to remain like that.
well, you'd think if you were a single-family home, you'd prefer to rent to a couple or a
Right.
family.
Correct.
And to make it so that once you're a student home, what if you fall out of that, now you have to go, through a process again to get back into it?
Yeah.
You almost encourage the landlords to say, I'm going to rent to students then. Because I never want to get out of that student home classification.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that once you've gotten the certificate of occupancy as a student home, that would
Carry forward.
carry forward.
Do you actually have to have students, do you actually have to rent it to students to get the certification, the occupancy, or can you just apply for it?
I think you
And
could
get
ask the fire marshal or whatever to,
And then you've got it, preemptively. So let's say you're renting to professors, you want to keep your options open, you apply for your occupancy.
Well, that's my question. My question is
You
I
got
get it, and I'm renting to students or not students, and then the next time, so every year I submit rental registration forms, and I say who's in my places, how many, and everything else, and what they do, I even think. And if I then, my question is, if I rent to non-students, would I lose it? Would I lose the student home classification? And then when I go to rent to students again, would I have to have the fire marshal come and inspect it again? So yeah, I think you understand the question.
I understand what you're saying, I understand what Jeremy has said, and we could actually clarify, write that in, if that's the recommendation of the board, that, just to make absolutely sure that once you've got a certificate of occupancy, it holds
Yeah.
for the duration of time that you're using it as a rental property.
Seems like that would be the fair approach.
So is this part of the, could that be part of a grace period? I'm just trying to,
No, I think this
so
would
you
be.
just say, here's your shot, you got 3 years, and this is what you want to do?
It could be that, but I think it's a standard practice that maybe Judd and Jeremy are proposing.
I think Evan's onto something there, that once it's an occupancy permit is issued, but then it becomes a rental to somebody other than students for 2 years, we don't know the condition of the property at that point. So we'd have to do a occupancy inspection again.
It's going to be better than if the students were living there. And the students, once they
Not
get those...
necessarily. I mean, it could be a family of children that write on walls and tear things apart and take the batteries out of smoke detectors. You know, you just never know.
So is the purpose of this then the safety of the students? Is that what you're saying?
Say what?
Is the purpose of this the safety of the students?
It's safety period. And it's just a safety inspection of the property.
That would imply that we should be doing it for homes with children.
Well, if it's not a student home, then it's not required, this is not required to get an occupancy
I
permit.
understand, I'm just taking your...
But again, I think there has to be a time limit. I mean, if it goes 3 or 4 years, and now you want to make it back to student homes again, you just don't know the condition of the property.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we have to decide what is the purpose of this? Is the purpose of this to create a new classification so we know where these things are with the potential future, or is the purpose to ensure the safety of the students in these homes? Which is what Bill's implying.
I think the major concern
This is a stepping stone to a potential solution to a problem we identified.
Right, which
with the
that's,
complaint.
right.
Yep.
I view it as a way to classify and to
Yeah.
stop, the family neighborhoods to continue,
Right.
which is not necessarily what you're indicating it is now, which
I
is
think the
more of a
overriding
safety.
concern is the safety of whoever is going to live in the house.
Yeah, I understand what the issue is, and I understand this slightly different points of view.
Yes.
If I'm understanding what you have said, and I think the way I would tend to go at this point is to make it clear here that a certificate of occupancy issued once is good for as long as that property is being rented, even if it goes back and forth. However, because I think then if the town believes that it needs to be reviewing the health and safety conditions of all rentals, as Henry does now on a 3-year cycle for multifamily dwellings, the town can expand that and just because then the health safety is really the primary reason for doing that for everybody. So I think there are two different tools, kind of converging, but we can make this tool a tool for regulating student homes with some health safety at the outset.
I think the occupancy permit should be good for as long as the structure is used as a student home. If it's stopped because you have professors living there, it goes away. And then, or it stays on file anyway. But then in 3 years, decide to have a student home again, have a occupancy permit.
But that means every year you could be going into all these places.
It's not a, what?
Every year, because every year, you're potentially flipping, I don't know, 100, 200 homes in one. I don't know what it would be. I don't know how many homes there are, but, I mean, I never know on a given year who's going to be in my homes. I don't know if it's going to be professionals, grad students, or students. You just don't know. And so that means every year I'm going to have to keep track of that and who's leaving, who's coming in, and sometimes it happens within a couple weeks, right? I mean, it's almost unmanageable. I don't know, you'd have to come in here and do that inspection before the students move in?
Sure.
So, you know, I sign a lease and then I call you and say, I think we're getting into very difficult waters to manage as a business owner. I mean, I think if the landlords of Orono knew this is how this would work, they wouldn't be happy, would be my guess. There'd be pushback on that, because that is a lot to deal with. Because again, some days you're signing a lease a week before someone's moving in, because you don't want it to be empty. And you're encouraging people to keep a rental as a student home, which is not what we want. I mean, the whole purpose of this is these single-family homes in these neighborhoods, we want to rent to families and professionals. You don't want them to be renting to students, and if I lose my student home occupancy, I have to go through that process again. I'm going to be like, no, I'm renting to students. So it's almost against what we're trying to do. So.
When someone applies for a certificate of occupancy, do you follow up to see if there are actually students in there? I'm going to I'll lead what I'm saying. What if collectively we're all neighbors and we really don't want students on our street, so we agree on applying for student housing with no intent of renting to students?
I don't think we would follow up to determine whether they're actually students or not that they're renting to.
So you could actually, you know, a neighborhood could collectively get together and gang together and not actually block a whole street off by applying for a certificate of student housing and never occupy them with students.
I'm not understanding what you're saying, Mike.
If you're going to limit the number of students in certain houses on.
But we're not at this point.
Right, but if it came to that.
If it came to that, you could, you know, you can write the ordinance, and when it comes to that point, the actual language of the ordinance would, I don't know that, yeah, sure, I guess probably, I'm not sure how they would do what you're suggesting they would do, but if that's a policy matter, we could guard against it.
I've seen how some neighborhoods work, and they would do anything to prevent certain people from coming into them if they could.
Yeah, I think the way this would be, the way student homes would be regulated as it is in St. Joseph, Minnesota, or Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, or Newark, Delaware, and so forth, talk to all of them, the system has worked well in most of those cases.
Yeah.
So to prevent, I mean, I'm just curious in those examples with Judd's concern, what would you recommend? Did you have any of those discussions, anything like this?
No, this is a kind of a novel thought that hadn't occurred to me, just going back and forth, that would be a big issue, but I think that's why you have this input from the planning board.
Correct. I'm just trying to think, what do you think would be the best tool, just in your recommendation, to address his concern? Because Bill had mentioned as soon as you'd flip-flop, and that goes against what Judd would say, so your tool to address student homes in particular.
My recommendation could be a little bit different from Bill's, not in terms of the use of this tool. Not that there shouldn't be a mechanism, as the comprehensive plan proposes, for ongoing ways to make sure that rental properties are in good condition, but I think that's a separate, it's a separate section of the ordinance. This thing, trying to regulate student homes, certainly is a step in the direction of house safety in terms of requiring a certificate of occupancy, but it's really just trying to make sure we know where student homes are and how many there are, and that once created as a student home, it meets basic health safety standards. But I think the next step, if the town wants to expand the inspection of single and family and two-family homes, as multifamilies are now inspected on a 3-year cycle, the town can do that. I'm not sure we should use this tool to achieve that end.
I agree with Judd. I don't want to provide a disincentive to make this work. So
what's the downside of you go through the motions, you get your certificate of occupancy, and then you have it and it doesn't expire? What's the downside of that? If you rent it to students, if it's good in 2017 to rent it to students, and then Judd has a property in 2018 happens to not be students, the same building exists. he's still responsible for the same level of safety in the building. And then 2019, students would return, let's say, to that property. What's different between 2017 and 2019?
What Bill would say is that there's a chance that in that intervening year, it could have been rented to a family with 10 children who tore up the place.
I understand, but in my opinion, that's still the responsibility of the landlord. And so really in practicality, maybe that's changed in that time frame, but it's judge responsibility, and he should know that, I assume, when he receives that permit. So I think it's reasonable for the landlord to be, you have to have some level of confidence, you know, that your business scenario isn't going to change from one year to the next. So that's just my take on it. I see no risk in having a multi-year permit.
Yeah, I mean, this is clearly quite a bit of concern from the planning board. So again, the proposal, I think there's a lot of stuff in here that we are okay with, but that concern, I don't want to provide that disincentive for people not to
And thanks
follow up.
for,
Yep.
Krista kind of turned me on to this. I view this as much bigger concern than than my previous concern, just because the other concern, I think Bill would be able to work out, and
Yeah.
I think he'd be fair and everything, but this one, it'd be a challenge business-wise, I think. It would be a challenge, so.
You'd have two options. I mean, you might have some other thoughts too. You have two options as to how to proceed, and one is you could table this and ask me to put together language addressing this concern or alternative language, you know, and then have it been brought back to you. Or you could just direct that we express this concern as you wish us to, as part of your recommendation to the council.
I'd almost rather hear that proposed language. I mean, push it back. You provide a perspective that I cannot. I'm not a landlord, so.
Yeah, well, I think, Jeremy, what you said was, that would be my preference, which is once you get it. I mean, the other thing I could live with would be some 5 or 10 year, so at least there's some good chunk of time that this thing's good for. And then every time you go back to a student home, it resets or something, I don't know. But
Right.
you need some sort of, you know,
So,
future planning.
This
so.
has generated a fair bit of discussion. I guess my recommendation, I wouldn't mind seeing some proposed language,
Yeah.
so we
Yeah.
could table this and then get it before the board. I'd rather have us agree on what we're pushing out to the council. That's just my thought.
I would say I agree with what's being said, namely that there are two separate things here, and that that once it's a student home, it shouldn't lose that standing just because a professor lived there for a year. And then the other issue, which I'm very concerned about, is that we make sure that these places that are rented to students are actually safe. But I think that is a separate issue to be dealt with separately. And I know in the past we've had homes for students that were not safe, so I don't know what the current status is, but, you know, that's a real concern that I have, but I don't think this is the mechanism for dealing with that.
Right. So can I get some comment, next steps?
Can I just ask one question?
Ken?
This is a dumb question, but whatever. Do building standards or safety standards ever change over time?
The BOCA code, yeah.
The town has a building code which is amendable. It doesn't change a lot over time. B, there is a international building code which does get updated every 3 years, and the town chooses whether to adopt that updated version. And C,
Life safety code.
I know, yeah, there's a life safety code as well, which goes through it's at state level, which goes through the same periodic updating. And D, I guess, finally, the town from time to time has thought about adopting a more comprehensive housing code of its own. That's not happened. I think it's something that the fire department has from time to time thought about. So yes, it can change and does change over time.
And the reason I ask probably is obvious, but if we have a student housing certificate that says this place is okay for 20 years, does it get updated in terms of safety standards? And that's why I brought it up.
Okay, thank you.
I think if I understand the gist of Judd's argument, I think you're trying to say that the occupancy permit would be, should be one-time deal, one time only, forever, for the property.
Yeah, that once you've gone through this process, which is kind of unique and special, that you wouldn't have to go through it every time you changed who was renting there. That I could go through it one time, or the other thing, which I wouldn't prefer as much, would be that that inspection or whatever it is happens, it lasts for a while. Now, again, I don't want to have this inspection and then also have the fire marshal inspection. Now I'm juggling these things. So, which, I'm for the fire marshal inspections. We go through them, it's a good exercise, good for me, good for the towns, good for everybody. But I don't have to juggle this occupancy thing as another thing on top of these, fire safety inspections. I feel like that's kind of onerous.
Well, I'll explain it, that when Henry and I do occupancy inspections for our business, I don't issue an occupancy permit until I get a report from Henry. So it would be basically the same situation. I would wait for Henry's report on the student home, or Henry or whatever, and then issue the, after I've done my inspection, issue the CVO.
Right, but you would be potentially going through these homes every year with Henry again, right? So year one, I rent to students. Year two, I rent to professionals, I guess every 2 years. Year two, I rent to professionals or grad students. Years three, I go back to students. So now, right now, Henry comes through every 3 years. Instead, you're coming through now all these places you've never gone through before, every 2 years potentially. And it's a more onerous inspection because it's not just Henry, it's you and Henry.
I'd like to move this thing along, so what I'd like is some feedback from the board for, well, my opinion is we could get some revised language, and then we consider that. I think he's heard a lot of our concerns. I think he can come back with something that we can digest and hopefully address a bunch of what we talked about, but we've got 2 more public hearings, and I don't want to be here all night, so.
Chairman?
Yeah.
When you move to table this, if you would move to table it to the next meeting rather than to the August.
That is
meeting,
correct.
You want to
Yeah.
come here in August just
Yeah.
for this. You might just want to say to the next.
To the next meeting, so that's what I'd like to propose.
I make a motion that we table this till the next meeting and ask Evan to work on the language to address the concerns so discussed.
I second.
Very good. Further discussion? All those in favor of that? Good. Thank you, everybody. Good discussion. Moving on, old business. We have a continuation of a public hearing of a request by John Tierney to amend an existing home occupation for recognition as a home business as defined by the land use ordinance for his retail store, Alpenglow Adventure Sports, at 92 Main Street, tax map 27-2, lot 149 in the medium density residential district. Just so you know, this is a continuation of a public hearing. We opened it up. We had a couple people show up at the last public hearing, but we didn't have an applicant to speak to. So if you could step up and tell us what you propose to do. We did have a couple comments that I'll bring to your attention from the last meeting, but.
My name's John Tierney. I live down at 92 Main Street and own Acadia Mountain Guides, which Alpenglow is a DBA as part of Acadia Mountain Guides. We've been in Orono, some of you know, since 1986 actually, but for the first 7 years we rented space on campus. And then we've been down at Main Street here for until 2001, 2002, somewhere along that line. We used to be where the Bear Brew was, and then eventually moved out of there and moved down to the current location. So that's kind of the brief history. Had a home occupation permit since then, and just looking to basically update that to the current guidelines of the new home occupation type of permit, home business permit.
Very good. Thank you. Again, the public hearing's still open. So I'm going to ask for questions from the board, from the applicant.
Sure.
Yeah. Any questions on this? I mean, this is, again, taking advantage of our new definition. So there were some questions. I don't know if you were briefed between this meeting and the last meeting. There were 2 people in the audience that raised concerns.
Yep.
So, Evan, or have you spoken with town staff?
Evan talked with me a little bit. and
Yeah,
he sent
did
me an email. I was in Africa doing a medical mission program while your last meeting, so I did get his email while I was in Africa, so, a while ago, but he gave me the gist of what the issues were.
So I guess, without questions from the board at the moment, one of these, I mean, it's right in the minutes, but I probably butcher his name by Paul Bauschutz, yeah, we'll try that. 8 Juniper Street, stated that while he understands the request, he'd like to know what the exact business is that is being run at 92 Main Street, as he believes there is another business besides Alpenglow Adventure Sports that is being run there. Mr. Bauschutz expressed concern for parking extended periods of time along Juniper Street. He mentioned that quite frequently, he just said if for longer periods of time, cars were, all up and down there, and he attributed that to your activities. So could you address that?
Sure, yeah. Just so everybody knows, the Acadia Mountain Guides has the primary office is in Bar Harbor. That's where we're based out of, down there on 228 Main Street. It's another property that I own. We have some employees that are interns that actually rent from me in the summer at my house, 2 interns, and we usually ask them to park on the street so that they're not parking in the driveway. We've kind of changed that so that, just in light of what Evan said, so those are the cars that are generally down there on Juniper Street, those 2 people, because they leave their cars here so that they can work in Bar Harbor. They stay down there, leave their cars here because we don't have any parking down there.
Right. Evan, how's this, so it's 4 employees now, right, with a new designation? Isn't it?
No, it is,
Just going, it was 2 and now doesn't it, I'm just trying to recall.
That's the size of the sign. It's 2
Well, I thought it was,
square feet
I
and 4
thought
no,
there
it's
was,
still more than 2 employees
Okay,
at
it's-
any
yeah.
given time working out.
so how is it, I'm just trying to think how this plays in. He's mentioned that these employees are off-site in Bar Harbor,
Off-site, so they would not,
so it's not.
Yeah, we have many employees in Bar Harbor.
yeah, the business can have more than
Yeah.
that number of employees as long as they're not working out of this
Right.
space.
Okay. All right, so I'm just trying to figure out, is that a concern, is that something that we're going to consider from a,
I had spoken to,
Yeah.
I can't remember his name, the owner across the street,
Yeah.
with the event center, and potentially, if we need to, just getting space from him to park a vehicle if we need to. I also talked to the police chief here about a space here and getting a space in the town lot. The problem is we can't park overnight,
Yeah.
so we're going to get an overnight permit so that we could, because sometimes we'll have a client come in, and that client wants to leave their vehicle. We're going to a trip on Katahdin or something like that, and we don't really have a place to leave that. So now that I've paved the driveway, it's a little bit easier, for sure. But we talked to the police chief, and he agreed to kind of give the business a permit, so we could have one permit that we could then give to a client if they want to leave their vehicle. It's whatever the fee is, $200, I think, for the fee.
okay.
In
So,
the
I
town
mean, that
lot.
was one of the concerns. It sounds like you've looked at a couple options, so I appreciate that. Another one was from Jeff Gordon, 22 Hamlin Street, would like to know who is personally responsible for the day-to-day functions of the business, and he'd also like to make certain that the applicant understands what is allowed and what is not allowed within a home business approval. So you've gone through the process with the town. Could you address that comment?
Yeah, well, I'm the one personally responsible, so I live there and own the business, so that would be me. So that's a pretty easy one to answer.
Yep. And you've gone through what is allowed and what isn't allowed in the home?
Yeah, I
business?
think what came to question is we've traditionally had, for the last several years, a spring and a fall sale. And that kind of came to fruition this spring, that we can't have that anymore. So that's, kind of a problem for us, but we'll figure something out. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Sounds like that one's been resolved as well. Okay, those are the 2 comments from the public. Anybody? All right. I'll keep
Okay.
asking. Questions from the board? Fairly straightforward. That's all I had. All right, I'm going to close the public hearing then, last call. All right, final comments? Yeah, yep, thank you. All right, proposed findings of fact. All right, again, these are proposed findings of fact for a home occupation permit for a home business for Alpenglow Adventure Sports, 92 Main Street, tax map 27-2, lot number 149 in the medium-density residential district, dated July 19, 2017, pursuant to Article 4, Section 18-106, and Article 5, Section 18-131 of the Orono Code of Ordinances. The Orono Planning Board has considered the application of Alpenglow Adventure Sports for a home occupation permit to operate a home business, which is a retail shop for outdoor sporting gear at 92 Main Street, tax map 27-2, lot 149, located in the medium-density residential district. Based on all evidence presented by the applicant, reviewing agencies, town departments, and the public, the Orono Planning Board has found that the applicant previously has received a permit for and currently operates the Alpenglow Adventure Sports shop as a home occupation at this location, but in order to classify the home occupation under the new category of home business, Planning Board further finds, in addition to all other standards with which the current home occupation must comply under its existing permit, and these are the home occupation and home business review criteria. Number one, requirements of the district that the subject property located in the medium-density residential district is a legal lot under the Orono Land Use Ordinance, in which the category of home occupation defined as home business is a permitted use with planning board approval under Article 4, Section 18-106, and Article 9, Section 18-273. Any issues with that? Hearing none. Number two, compliance with home occupation standards, Article 5, Section 18-131, subsections A through K. Read these all together now. That the application submitted demonstrates that the home business will continue to be subordinate to the residential use of the property and will not alter the appearance of the premises such that it would differ from its existing residential character. That based on the application submitted, the home business will have a single sign of no more than 4 square feet in area. That a sign of this size will not have undue adverse visual impact on the neighborhood, and that the use of other advertising media will not increase traffic to the home business that would cause demand for more than 4 parking spaces as allowed by the land use ordinance. That this home business will provide no more than 4 on-site parking spaces to accommodate clients or customers, and will not have clients or customers coming to his home business in numbers requiring more than 4 on-site parking spaces. And lastly, that the classification of the existing home occupation as a home business will not result in any material change in the operations or character of the home occupation that would cause it to be in non-compliance with standards governing all home occupations. Any issues with those 4 items? Hearing none, I think we're ready for a motion.
I move that we approve the home business application for Alpenglow Adventure Sports, located at 92 Main Street, tax map 27-2, lot 149, with the following 2 recommendations. 1, that the home business continue to be registered with the Code Enforcement Office as a home occupation, and number 2, that the home business comply with all applicable standards governing home occupations as set forth in Section 18-131, home occupations of the Land Use Ordinance.
Very good. Thank you, Jed. I have a motion. Can I have a second?
Second.
Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Very good. Unanimous. Lastly, we have a continuation of a public hearing and review of an amendment to the land use ordinance to establish the Main Street office overlay district along Main Street from Juniper Street to Kelly Road. This matter was tabled at the Planning Board's June 21, 2017 meeting until our meeting this evening, and the public hearing was kept open. Since that time, we did request a bunch of information from Evan, and we also have 2 letters that were emailed to you, so thank you, Caitlin. So these weren't just presented to us this evening. I hope you had a chance to take a look at them before the meeting, but that was very helpful to get them to us before the night of the meeting. So that's where we are. I'm going to start with Evan. If you could give us an update from our last meeting.
Yes. As you know, the public twice preceding meetings, you've had received comment from members of the public And some of that comment had to do with concern of office use, even if it's a low-impact kind of office use, supplanting residential use and diluting the residential character of that neighborhood. And also introducing some level of business traffic that may not be there today. And you asked me to prepare some alternative recommendations as starting point for your discussion of how you want to recommend this amendment back to the town council. So I've done that, and there are 4 here ways you could go. There are other ways you could go, but this is your starting point. One is to recommend it as presently drafted, i.e. the Main Street Office Overlay District. Second, without a residency requirement, it would simply allow office uses in return for certain requirements for preservation of the architecture and other visual character of this corridor. Second option is to recommend it, but with a residential use requirement. That is, any structure that was going to be rented out for office space would also have to have a residential use as part of that property. Wouldn't mean that the owner would have to live on the property, but, and a good case in point would be something that might be a 3-unit now, residential apartments. One of those might be rented out as an office instead. Still a landlord who doesn't live there, but there'd be still residential, it'd be mixed residential use and office use. Third possibility, which I'm calling 2B, would be a residential owner occupancy requirement, which would mean that somebody could rent out part of their property for an office, but they would have to be living on the property. And should they ever leave that property, the office use would have to also leave, unless the new owner also wanted to rent it out. And that would be akin to the rainstorm scenario where the owner of that business lives in part of the house and runs an office someplace else, but they could also rent it to somebody else. It doesn't have to be their office business. And the fourth recommendation is to recommend against adopting the overlay district on the basis that other things have happened to give a little bit more leeway in this quarter, because it's part of the MDR district, where other leeway has been created through streamlining home occupations and amendments dealing with travelers accommodations and residential care, adult assisted living facilities, and that other conditions, market conditions, have changed since the time of the comprehensive plan.
All right.
So those are the 4 approaches that kind of bookend. You can certainly add others or change these.
So just to refresh everybody's memory, you know, in the comp plan, we proposed a little bit, you know, wider scope. And then council, there's been 2 public hearings, and the significant input that you received, you know, people were against it, but then you started to get a little bit of a give, and that it was at a minimum the residents there, but not necessarily home, you know, the owner occupied. And then last time we heard some comment about owner occupied, just trying to, you know, I guess maintain the, you know, the houses that were there. And then we have 2 comments or 2 letters recently, which are a little bit more flexible. So that's where we are. Do I need to read these into the record?
Have you all read the letters?
Yes.
I think if you've all read the letters, they are part of the record, and they will be reflected in the minutes.
Yep. So these are both in support of the overlay district. So, options, one of the comments from the gentleman that we just approved is home business. Again, he has a very large residence, and his comment, I think, was, when we heard him the first time, was that he wanted the flexibility, so he was looking for, I think, alternative 1, and then we've heard comment for alternative 2A and 2B, and some folks didn't want anything. So that's where we are. Any comments, questions from Evan on the alternatives that he provided? Do people have a leaning?
So I wasn't involved in the comprehensive plan, unfortunately, so I don't know all the history to this.
Yep.
But I did listen very carefully to all the public comment that was made, and I've thought a lot about this, and I reached out to Evan a few weeks ago, I guess, when I was thinking about it on the way to work, and it occurred to me that what are we trying to solve with this right now? In other words, when the comprehensive plan went in was done several years ago, there was a certain economic world that we were in. There was a certain number of buildings that were or number of houses that were for sale, some that weren't. It was a different scenario, at least what was presented publicly here, anyway, my impression was made. It was a different world then than it is now. And so it occurred to me, are we trying to fix an old problem with a current solution? And should we shelve this and so I recommended the option 3, recommend that we don't approve this at this time. We don't necessarily, what I meant with Evan was, we don't necessarily disapprove it, but we shelve it for this time period until the need arises again. In other words, the next recession or the next influx of requests for businesses to move in. Are we solving something that doesn't exist and creating angst in society, in the public, by doing so at this time?
Mm-hmm.
So that was my thoughts. And so I recommended that we consider number 3.
Mm-hmm. Yep, thank you, Jeremy. Other comments, other takes from the public comment? Those of you that remember the comp plan, the discussions that we had back then?
Okay.
That have that context?
I guess I'm leaning towards alternative 2B, where we require residential owner occupancy. And I think that this thing represents a lot of work, a lot of information, and this alternative 2B is very restrictive. You can't do very much under this unless you happen to live in your building. And so it would be a way of getting the basic concept of a overlay district on the books and getting the work that was done in terms of which buildings are included, what some of all the other issues that were addressed, getting that on the books. And it would not affect the people who live there hardly at all. And it would be there if in 5 or 6 or 10 years we go back to a situation where this street really needs support and we need to do something. Then we have the work that's been done, we have a foundation, and the council could move forward with making whatever modifications are needed to address that situation. I kind of hate to see us lose all the work and thought that's gone into this, and I think this would be a way of preserving that with a minimum impact on the people that live there now.
Very good. Thank you, Krista. Others? What's your take from comments that we've heard? Dave, you participate in the comp plan.
Yeah, and I've had an opportunity to talk to several people just that I met, and they, actually some of them brought this up, and they were very apprehensive about the whole idea, but when I mentioned, well, what if it requires the owner's residency, and that was acceptable to them.
Right.
So that would go with what Krista just said, the same option. It seems to be a foot in the door, and people, it will probably be better accepted.
What was your take, Mike?
I'm leaning the same way as Krista and Dave. Having the owner occupy the building gives it some stability to the building.
Jeremy's point is valid in that the conditions appear to have changed, although the whole discussion, and what I took out of that is that this is also cyclical. So this is, our comp plan was a 10-year projection, approved in 2015. We heard a lot of input at the time, so we were trying to come up with solutions, but I'm leaning toward you, and I'll get to you two down the line, but that seemed like a pretty restrictive compromise so that we wouldn't lose momentum. It does provide people some flexibility, and we have heard people at the recent public hearings, Mr. Tierney, and we've got 2 letters of support, and we also heard people say, some of the people that were against this in public hearing, that they, and I believe I heard this from you, that they were amenable to owner-occupied. That seemed to be their default. They're like, yeah, we could live with that. So I don't want to create a problem where there might not be any, but, we have received input, and that to me is a ground, but I didn't ask you. Judd, what's your thought?
I mean, I was leaning towards 2B.
Yep.
And then Jeremy talked, and I was leaning towards number 3. And then Krista talked. I was leaning back to 2B. I mean, I definitely don't like 1 or 2A. I mean, the reason to go 2B in my mind is because we kind of do have that flexibility in the future, and you've kind of taken that first step. I'm not sure if we could do 3 and still, even though you said we wouldn't like throw it away, I'm kind of concerned that in 5 years, it kind of would get thrown away, because none of us might be here, and, who knows what it'll be. But I could live with either one.
All right, what do you think?
I like 2B because I think it's proactive, and if we find ourselves, which we will, in a recession situation, people are going to be stressed again. And trying to make a decision for change in a stressful environment is harder. And I think this is minimal impact, but it puts us, it's a little proactive.
I happen to agree with you. I mean, I was looking at 2A or 2B. Clearly, we received enough input that 1, it seemed fine when we put together the comp plan. That was step 1, but a lot of people weighed in. But at the end of the day, we've heard a lot of positive support. But my takeaway was that they could live with 2B and allow some flexibility so we get a little bit more of a positive direction to address a problem we identified. And we had a lot of discussion over this. But that gets us started down the path and gives those people with the really big houses. Mr. Tierney has a really big house, Alpenglow. The facility that he has now, home business, there's a lot of square footage. So this gives them a little bit more wiggle room. And one of the letters talked about wanting that flexibility. So we're giving a little, again, we're just kind of finding a medium ground, and that worked well for us. It served us pretty well in the comprehensive plan development. So I'm thinking of along that path. So at this point, I'm a fan of 2B as well. So further comments?
You all make a convincing argument.
That's what the planning board is for.
Not losing momentum is not something that I'd thought of.
Yeah.
But one thing that I heard from the public is they're concerned about the unknown. And then it dawned on me, what are we really trying to solve today? But you're right, Lisa, in that if change comes, we need to be in a position to make moves now, not go through this whole process again for months and months and months. So it's a convincing argument.
I've heard a lot of 2Bs, and somebody that could be, we can twist his arm a little bit, but, he could, probably be leaning that way. So, all right, any changes, well, if we were to go with 2B, any changes to 2B, or was it reasonable as Evan presented it to us?
I would have to, prepare the language for that, but I think I can do that with you can make that recommendation with this change. It's simple language to incorporate, and I would incorporate that going back to council. Unless you want to come back to you again in a couple months.
I'd like to put one of these to bed, but I think we have enough that, if board members agree, that we have enough with this alternative language that he could amend what we started with and send that back to council.
Yep.
We'll have enough to discuss with our table discussion, and I think there'll be more of these, but I think we've moved far enough along with this one to send it along.
I agree.
All right, if there's no further changes, I think we can get a motion.
You want to do this one? No?
All yours.
Okay. I move that we recommend to the council the approval, or recommend to the council that we modify the land use ordinance for the Main Street overlay for alternative 2B. Can I say that, or do I need to read 2B into the?
No, you can, why don't you, alternative 2B as laid out in the memorandum dated,
In the memorandum from Evan Rickert dated July 19th, 2017, with the subject of alternative recommendations, Main Street Office Overlay District.
Works for me. You got a motion?
I second.
Very good. Second. Any further discussion? Which was very good discussion, by the way. I think we're doing our work as a planning board and evaluating these quite carefully. So no further discussion. All those in favor? Very good. All right, that was easier than I thought. Other new business, item 6, there is none. Too bad. 7, discussion, no meeting in August.
I would just, I think probably not. I know, we know of nothing that has come in or now that is pending, so I think it is safe to say no meeting in August. I'm quite sure there will be one in September, because I know of an application coming in, at least one. And Janet will be sitting in the seat at that time.
Welcome aboard.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Evan. The last item is adjournment. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Very good. Second?
Seconded.
Very good. All those in favor? All right, see you in a couple months.
Thank you very much.
Anybody want workshops, anything, so we don't have to take a month off?
Do the minutes and refer to